I invite you to take this virtual tour with me as I visit some of my favorite cars at the Automobile Driving Museum in El Segundo, California. This is a 1886 Benz. It's the first automobile in which uses an internal combustion engine with the exploding created by an electrical charge. It's a single cylinder. It drives this belt. The belt connects to a shaft, and the shaft connects to these chains, and it's chain drive. Does not have any brakes. This one was made in 1986 by Mercedes, contracting with Deutsche Bahn AG, a railroad company, to make 11 duplicates of the one they have of the original. It was given to Beverly Hills Mercedes, who donated it to us. You started by spinning that wheel, and it has, interestingly enough, the lever is actually rack and pinion steering. Mrs. Benz took this car for about 75 kilometers with her two sons, stopping along the way to get naphtha, because they didn't have gasoline, but it's very similar to it. And she bought it at a pharmacy, and then when she arrived at her mother's home, there were a bunch of newspaper people there to report it, so it really was a stunt to help sell the cars, and it did. It was to try to prove that women could drive them, and they were good for long distance. I'm looking at a 1904 Schackt. Schackt was very advanced. If you'll notice, it's got some things other cars don't have. It has a radiator in front. It has a steering wheel. And most important, it has brakes. So it's the first of the high-wheelers that were so equipped. They're called high-wheelers because they have wagon wheels, hard rubber wagon wheels. In 1905 in Britain, the British government organized a run of cars. There were enough cars then in England to take a drive as a group from London to Brighton. It's called the Brighton Run. And every year they have a renewal of the Brighton Run, but you cannot enter it unless your car is 1905 and earlier. So this car is, when you describe it, is Brighton eligible. I'm standing in front of a 1914 Saxon. My hand is on the radiator cap, but if you look at it, it's got a temperature gauge there. That's how we would tell when the car would overheat, right by having a gauge there. Saxons did not have any electricity. The engine was fired by spark plug, but by a magneto. So, and it would start with a crank, just like the Model Ts. However, they did a couple of improvements. They had an acetylene tank on the running board, and its purpose was that if you're driving along and it turns dark and you have to get home, you turn on the acetylene, it'll make a gas, and then you open up your headlight, take a match, and light your lights. So you would have some light for going home. The museum loans out its cars from time to time to other museums for good purposes. This car will be going to St. Louis shortly to celebrate Alice Burke's drive across country in a Saxon in 1915, very similar to our 1914, who was the leader of the suffragette program, trying to get women the right to vote.
Stanley, you said that in 1915 she drove all the way across the United States. Where does somebody stop to get gasoline for a trip like that?
Well, the road systems had started to be established. There were car manufacturers who would give a grant to a city if the city would extend its road outside of the city by a certain amount, they'd connect it to the next city. So the roads were there and gas stations were starting, but mostly they would go to the general store. and buy, if it wasn't gasoline, it would be a kerosene or naphtha that they would be able to fire, and it would make some smoke, but it will work. But most places had gasoline available.
Wow, that's good.
But it was in the general store or the pharmacy rather than a station. I'm standing next to a 1916 Packard Twin 6. Not a 12, Twin 6. It's actually two 6-cylinder engines mounted at 60 degrees, now V8s are at 90 degrees, on one crankshaft. This is about as luxurious a car as you could buy in 1916. This is the car of the 1% that really could afford it. It is got a lot of different kinds of equipment on it. That isn't a battery box you're looking at, that's the tool box, because when you drove one of these you had to have tools with you. That gives you a good idea of the reliability of cars of 1916. We're looking at a 1922 Detroit Electric. Electric cars started in 1905, so they're not new. The Detroit Electric was made from 1905 to 1936. However, the last few years were really reconditioned cars, not new ones. They were very popular with women before the Bendix invented the automatic starter, because you didn't have to crank them. The driver is sitting in the back seat with another passenger, and a third passenger can sit in a seat in the front of him, and there's a little bucket seat there. It is steered by a lever, not by a steering wheel. Range about 50 miles. The 1930 Stutz Wyman Monte Carlo. The body was made by a French builder, Wyman. Wymans are like World War I airplanes. They're wood frame on which fabric is stretched. And they made that so that the car would be lighter and quieter, because cars of that vintage had metal over wood, and with time they would creak and start to make noises, so this was quieter. The fabric over the engine compartment is over metal, because if it was wood and the engine got hot, it could start a fire. If you're allowed to touch it, when you touch it, it's soft and moves. I'm standing in front of a 1931 Ford Model A Roadster. 1931 was the last year of the Model A's. Ford had started them in 27 because the sales of Model Ts had fallen off. In fact, Model Ts had gotten a bad reputation by then as not being a very convenient car anymore, and Chevrolet had taken over a lot of their sales. But the Model A only lasted for 4 years, 27 through 31. But you will find more Model A's on the road today than you will Chevrolets of that heritage. This particular one is about as loaded with extras as you could possibly get. It's got the quail, it's got the little turning reflector lights, it's got side mounts, has a nice rumble seat, so it's pretty loaded. If you look, you'll see there are two caps that look like water caps on the hood. The front one is in fact water, and the back one is for gasoline, because Ford overcame the problem of having the car stall if the gasoline was underneath the seat by putting it in the cowl. Now that gives you a choice between T's and A's. Do you want to risk your front or your rear?
Stanley, this is a 1931 Model A. The Model T was before it.
Why Ford named it as Model A? Well, he's pretty inscrutable, no matter what you want to deal with him. I can't tell you why I called it an A. The following car was a B. Model Bs had a choice. between a four-cylinder engine similar to a Model A or the first V8 engine. And the V8 engine turned Chevrolet into a weak car because the Ford V8, 60 horsepower, the first one V8, gave you torque and gave you speed. And of course, as soon as that happened, the gangsters of the 30s started adopting Fords. Dillinger actually sent a letter to Henry Ford thanking him for the 34 Ford V8 that he got away from the police in.
Did he ever make a six-cylinder car?
Yes.
At that time?
Not at that time. Ford made a six-cylinder engine in the late 30s and continued to make that into the 50s. We have a 65 Mustang with a six-cylinder engine. Actually, it's an excellent engine. The Ford 6 is an excellent engine. It doesn't have the torque of a V8, but it's probably a better engine. Way back when I was pretty young, my father had a 1932 Buick 90 two-door Victoria. Anyway, I would climb into the Buick, get behind the wheel, and I was driving in my mind all over the world. And when I got into collecting, one of the cars I wanted was a 1932 Buick 90 two-door. And so I bought one. It took me a long time to find the right one. And occasionally I come here and I climb in my 1932 Buick and I travel all over the world again. I'm sitting in the chauffeur's position of a 1932 Plymouth Brewster Town Car that was custom made for Eleanor Roosevelt. If you'll notice, I'm out in the weather and the passengers are sheltered. Why is that? Well, Eleanor wanted privacy when she had meetings with people and didn't want to be overheard. She chose a Plymouth because Franklin Roosevelt was running for president as a Democrat, and Democrats don't ride in Cadillacs and Packards or Lincolns. They ride in Plymouths. This is a 1935 Chrysler Airflow. Chrysler called it an Airflow because they designed it in a wind tunnel so that it would have a modern look and less wind resistance. It's really a very modern looking car for 1935, but it wasn't very popular, even though mechanically it was very advanced. It's unibody, it has hydraulic brakes, and ball and rod suspension. They were considered ugly, they didn't sell very well, and in fact, girls didn't want to go out on dates in them. You really couldn't get a date if you wanted to go out in an Airflow. My friend's father had a Chrysler Airflow and I had a 35 Ford. So when he had a date, he'd borrow my 35 Ford and I would take his father's Chrysler Airflow, put 4 or 5 guys on it, get in it, and go out cruising for girls. Of course, we never found any. But the Airflow has a very special place in my heart because my friend's father had it and because of all the times I went around cruising in it. When I was just starting high school, I was 14, my parents got mad at me because I was borrowing friends' cars, and they said they would buy me a car. What did I want? And I said I want a 1936 Ford 3-window coupe or a roadster. So they went to an auction and bought me a 1935 Ford 5-window. The difference is the 5-window is a nerd's car, and the 3-window or the roadster is a jock's car. So I went to high school and drove a nerd's car. Well, like I do these days, I hunt around and find the cars that I wanted that I didn't get, and I get them now. So I went out and got this 36 Ford Roadster, my car. My 36 Ford Roadster has a rumble seat. A lot of cars of that vintage had a rumble seat. A rumble seat is really a trunk that is modified to turn it around and make a seat in it. Now, I would go out on dates sometimes in a rumble seat, and they were really great because they're cold and windy, and your date will cuddle up trying to stay warm. We don't use rumble seats anymore because they're really not safe to be sitting in what was a trunk. This is a 1936 Lincoln 12-cylinder town car, custom body by Brunn. As you can see, I'm where the chauffeur would sit, in the open. And the owner and his passengers would sit inside in luxury. Not many of these were sold during the Depression, 1936, but enough were so that we have samples left now. This is a 1936 Packard 12 convertible sedan. It's my first collector car. I bought it in 1971. It didn't look like this then. It looked like a piece of trash. I didn't buy one that was all fixed up because I really wanted to do the work myself until I learned that I really didn't have those skills. I made every mistake anybody could ever make on restoring a car, including losing parts, giving it to the wrong restorers, and having it vandalized when it was stored. It wasn't finished until 1999, where it was shown at the 100th anniversary of Packard and took a first. People ask me what it's worth. I don't know, but to me, it's priceless. I'm standing next to a 1936 Packard 8 Phaeton. It's called the Stalin Packard. The Packard was not going to make Phaetons in 1936, only convertible sedans, but the State Department leaned on them to make Phaetons using the 1935 body. They made 24, 22 of which were exported to Russia as a gift to Joseph Stalin. The reason the State Department wanted to do that was to have a relationship during the Depression, because the United States and Russia had not been getting along because we had left our Marines in Siberia after World War I. We got this one back from Russia. So this is the Stalin Packard. When we have a car like the white 36 Packard, it's difficult to take the public for rides in them, so we try to get a duplicate. This is a 1937 Packard 12 convertible sedan. So this car was acquired to be a driver. The year we got it, we went through and serviced it completely, and then took it on a Packard tour to Death Valley. And leaving Death Valley, the curator of the museum, Earl Rubenstein, was moving ahead of me when all of a sudden I saw the drive shaft drop out of the car. But we were on a Packard tour, so there were about 20 other people on the tour, and immediately 20 Packard owners with their toolboxes came running out. What had happened is that the drive shaft is bolted to a universal joint with 4 bolts, and someone had taken it out and put it back together and left only 1 bolt, and it sheared. So now it became, where do we find 4 bolts? We hunt all over and we can't find matching ones until we see one of the members' driver's license plate. And so we took his license plate off, pilfered his 4 bolts, put the car back together again, and went off on the tour. That's what it's like going on a Packard tour. Breaking down is part of it. This is a 1939 Cadillac formal sedan. It was restored here at the museum, but not a complete restoration. It belonged to a doctor in Ventura who drove it around for a while and then decided to have it restored. So he hired a restorer and he picked low bidder. If you've ever had a home improvement done by a low bidder, you can see what might happen. So that restorer, in order to get draws on for cash that he needed, draws on the contract, put the trim on with double-sided tape, put the windshield wipers on with no motors, did the same thing with the windows. And when the doctor found out about it, he got very angry, and he took the car away from him and he gave it to the next low bidder, who then stole parts off the car, stripped it from a lot of different pieces, and said, and basically abandoned the job. At that point, the doctor got in touch with me, and I said we would have the car finished, and then he could get a donation. So we did. We bought parts for it. Some are original, some are aftermarket, and put the car back together again. So it is complete as it is now. I then invited the doctor to come and see his car, and he said, I never want to see that goddamn thing again, and never came here. During the build-up for World War II, it became necessary to look for and build different kinds of vehicles, and the government contracted with Dodge to build a half-ton military command car. This is the same kind of car that you would see General Patton riding around in. In 1940, they made the half-ton, but it didn't do very well on the Libyan desert. So by 41, they started changing it to a 3/4 ton. The Automobile Driving Museum has a rare 1940 Dodge Army command car. By 41, they had made the 3/4 tons, which were stronger, and you can tell the difference very quickly between a 40 and a 41 by just looking at the hood. If the hood slopes downward, it's a half-ton, and if it's level, it's a 3/4 ton. On display at the Automobile Driving Museum is a 1942 Ford Jeep. This is a replica made by the grandson of the man who was in Europe driving this exact vehicle. There was a contest as to who could make the best vehicle for off-road for the military in 1939, 1940. A very small company called American Bantam came in with the Jeep and developed this car that was the winner. However, Bantam didn't have good political connections and was not able to arrange to build a factory, so the government turned manufacture over to Willys. But Willys couldn't even produce enough of them, so they had to subcontract to Ford, and you have Ford Jeeps. Interestingly enough, military people, when the new Jeeps came in, those that had got there first grabbed the Fords and not the Willys. This is a 1941 Cadillac Model 62 Convertible. It was a very, very popular car during World War II because it was fancy and ran pretty well, and still is a very popular car. Now, I was at an auction really for a different car with my friend John, and I had gotten outbid on the car that I was looking for. And before I was getting up, John said, I always wanted a 41 Cadillac Convertible. So I said, okay, I'll buy it for you. I bid for it and was a successful bidder. A couple of reporters heard the story, so they came over and said, you mean you went out and bought a car for a friend? And I said, yes. And it hit the newspapers. John is not driving much anymore, and he donated the car to the Automobile Driving Museum. Thank you, John. My father used to buy only Plymouths, and in 1940, the new 41 Plymouth came out, and he said to me, we're going to go and pick out a new car. And he said, you can pick out the car for the family. So I walked down the row and I saw a convertible and I said, let's buy this one. It's green and that's my favorite color. And he said, no, not a convertible, any four-door sedan. So I picked a four-door sedan, two-tone green, and that became the family car during World War II. I still pine to get my convertible. So several years ago at Hershey, where they have cars for sale, and I see it across the way, and I just beelined right for it, talked to the owner, and I bought the 41 Plymouth that I wanted in 1940 instead of the sedan. So I have my car now, and I have my father's car. I'm sitting in a 1947 Chrysler Windsor Highlander convertible. It's called a Highlander because it has a Scotch plaid interior. When I first saw one of these cars, it was a friend of mine in high school who had them. He also had a lot of girlfriends. The fact that he was cute, had a great personality, and spent money like water didn't mean to me that's why he had all the girlfriends. It was the car. When I saw this car in an auction, the exact model, color, and style of my friends, I couldn't resist it, and I bought it for the Automobile Driving Museum. This is a 1951 Buick Special Sedanette, also known as a torpedo back. Buick was not going to make, in fact, did not make Sedanettes in 1951. They took leftover 50 bodies and put 51 trim on them. I first saw this car in Laurel Canyon under a tree, looking forlorn but not abandoned. So I went in to see the owner of the house to inquire about the car, and she told me the story. Her husband, when they were dating, used the car to take her out on dates. In fact, they went on their honeymoon in it. And shortly thereafter, unfortunately, he got ill and died, and she just couldn't part with the car, and that's why it was sitting there. And I said to her that wasn't really fair to her husband and his memory. Let us give the car to the Automobile Driving Museum in El Segundo. They'll restore the exterior. The interior was just perfect and still is. And so that's what was done. The car was given to the Automobile Driving Museum. It was restored here. And then I invited the lady to come and see the car, but she has never come. She said it's just too hard for her to look at the car again with all of its memories. I'm seated in the driver's seat of an Austin Healey getting ready to take a ride. I don't drive these anymore, but I used to drive them. It was my first sports car, was a 1954 Austin Healey 100. Bobby Darin had the first one, and I fell in love with one. I had been stationed with the military in Germany, and I saw a Austin Healey, so I bought one. I was stationed in West Germany, but I had a part-time job in Italy. So I used to drive the car over the old St. Gothard Pass through Switzerland into Italy. One time, my car was red and black. And as I came off from Lake Lugano, Lake Como, I was being applauded by all the Italians because I was the first one down. They were having a race that day. And since my car was red, they thought, and the racing colors of Italy are red, they thought I was the winner. This Austin Healey, I acquired it in Hershey one year, but I have given it to the museum. And I have another one at home to use. Unfortunately, it is not red and black.